Today, we're looking at one of the most debated matchups in all of Dragon Ball, Super Saiyan God Goku versus Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. On one hand, you got Goku's divine form unlocked through a ritual and capable of clashing with the God of Destruction. On the other, you have the ultimate fusion of Goku and Vegeta in their most primal Saiyan states. We're going to break down their power, speed, and abilities in context from both Dragon Ball Super and GT to figure out who really comes out on top. If you enjoy conversations like this and want to take part in deeper Dragon Ball discussions, I highly encourage you to join the Dragon Ball HQ Discord server, link below in the description. We'll be diving into this topic and more over there. Now, without further delay, let's begin. To start off this GT scaling, I'm approaching it with as much generosity as possible. That said, I won't be shying away from any challenging claims that lack support, especially some of the more extreme power level arguments often thrown around. Let's begin with the universally accepted benchmark. Goku in his base form during GT is already beyond any version of Majin Buu. This is based on his encounter with General Rodo, a character whom Goku outright states surpasses Buu in strength. Whether that comparison is meant for Kid Buu or even someone like Buhan is mostly irrelevant. The point is, Goku has already eclipsed the entire Buu tier early on. Unfortunately, after this milestone, Goku's progression in GT becomes harder to measure. He doesn't gain power through rigorous training or natural progression like in Z. Instead, any noticeable increases come from the transformations or brief power-ups granted by others. For example, some fans argue that Goku gets significantly stronger during the Super 17 arc, estimating up to an 8 times power jump. This theory stems from Super 17 overpowering Ooh, who by then has surpassed the level of Super Saiyan 3 Goku from the baby arc. But this idea quickly falls apart when you realize Super 17 was deliberately restraining himself during the fight to analyze Goku's techniques. Because of that, we can't confidently claim Goku experienced any substantial growth in power from this. Even if we were to accept this theoretical increase, it wouldn't drastically alter Goku's standing in GT overall. Likewise, while it's true that upper tier Shadow Dragons are portrayed as stronger than villains like 17 or Baby, the exact margin is left very vague. GT doesn't provide any explicit power jumps for these enemies, making direct comparisons mostly speculative. Some numeric benchmarks do exist though. For instance, Baby's transformations come with loose scaling potential, and Omega Shenron is mentioned to have a 10-fold increase. What is worth breaking down is Baby's evolution and how that reflects on Super Saiyan 4 Goku's scaling. When Goku first clashes with Baby Vegeta before he transforms, they're relatively even, with Goku eventually succumbing to stamina issues rather than a huge difference in strength. Baby then shifts into what's known as Super Baby 1, where he boasts of finally unlocking the pinnacle of Saiyan strength. Goku in return remarks that he's never sensed such intense ki before, and to imply that this form may tap into knowledge or power reminiscent of Super Vegeta, based on Baby's fusion with Vegeta's body and memories. Later, Baby evolves into Super Baby 2, a form that GT Perfect Files describes as being visually similar to Super Saiyan 3. While this isn't a strict 4 times multiplier confirmation, we'll be generous and assume it operates under the same logic. If that's the case and Baby's forms build sequentially, then Super Baby 2 could reasonably be over 3,000 times more powerful than Goku's base form, assuming standard multipliers from Dragon Ball Z are applied. This brings us to Golden Grade Ape Goku, who appears to overwhelm Super Baby 2 with brute strength alone. On paper, this shouldn't make sense. A typical Grade Ape transformation amplifies power 10 times, and a Super Saiyan Grade Ape boost should be 500 times. But even that multiplier wouldn't bridge the enormous gap required to surpass Baby's final form. However, GT introduces a narrative caveat, making it an exceptional case that goes beyond a raw multiplier. This form doesn't just transform his body, it awakens previously sealed off power, effectively rewriting Goku's scaling altogether. While we aren't given an exact number, it's clear that Goku's power in his Grade 8 form exceeds most expectations. The transformation being offered here is a large boost than a typical multiplier, as it allows Goku to push past Baby's most powerful state at that point. It's not just a cosmic change, it represents a drastic jump in strength, certainly more than the 6-fold difference needed to overcome Super Baby 2. Following this transformation, Goku reaches the iconic Super Saiyan 4 form. From the jump, he begins to overwhelm Baby with apparent ease, using only a small portion of his power according to Elder Kai. However, the tide shifts when Baby himself accesses his own Grade 8 form. In contrast to Goku's version, there's no indication that Baby's transformation is unique or tied to any sort of latent potential. It's just likely a straightforward 10 times increase over his previous power, like a normal Grade 8 would be. There are some who suggest that Baby's exposure to an enormous concentration of blood waves, supposedly 1,000 times the norm, amplified his strength by a similar margin. But there's no concrete evidence that blood wave quantity scales linearly with strength multipliers. The idea remains speculative. Ultimately, Goku requires the energy of his allies to reach his full power and defeat Baby, especially with the help from Majin. This implies that Super Saiyan 4 by itself isn't massively stronger than Golden Grade 8 Baby. Otherwise, the narrative wouldn't stress how dangerous Baby remained even after Goku's transformation. With that in mind, it's reasonable to place Super Saiyan 4's multiplier roughly at 30,000 to 40,000 times base Goku. This fits with the relative strength comparisons made throughout the Baby saga, and allows enough room for the transformation to remain significant without breaking consistency. There's also one popular claim in the GT community worth addressing: the belief that Super Saiyan 4 Goku surpasses space and time due to a line in the Chosensu referencing the Sogoku space, which lacks spatial and temporal dimensions. However, that interpretation doesn't hold up. The Room of Spirit and Time, the hyperbolic time chamber, is another example of a subspace, and it's one that explicitly holds a measurable time flow and a finite interior. Escaping these spaces doesn't require transcending time, it just means breaking out of a pocket dimension, something other characters have done as well, such as Super Buu and Gotenks in the chamber. And Tsukurogo space in this screenshot is also being mentioned alongside the time chamber, so it makes sense to compare them. Goku breaking out of the Tsukurogo realm as some kind of metaphysical feat is not the case. It's important to remember that it's more like smashing out of a specialized holding cell, not rewriting the fabric of the universe. All things considered, GT Goku scales massively above the threats of Dragon Ball Z, far beyond Majin Buu or even Vegeta. He still doesn't reach the top of the GT power pyramid, however, as Omega Shenron clearly outscales him and Goku is forced into increasingly desperate situations. But that leads us to our main guy. Gogeta's strength in Dragon Ball GT presents a fascinating case, particularly because his feats and supporting statements are spread across various sources and not as linear as Goku's. Unlike Goku, whose progression and power scaling are largely centralized and consistent, Gogeta's portrayal is more fragmented, but still immensely impressive when pieced together. To start, we can't use the performances of GT's lesser characters to extrapolate Gogeta's capabilities. Nothing they accomplish rivals the heights reached in Dragon Ball Z, let alone what Gogeta achieved. So what puts Gogeta on the map? According to the GT Perfect files, he described outright as the most powerful character in existence at the time. This positions him above not only Omega Shenron, but also Black Smoke Shenron, both of whom have been credited with enough destructive potential to wipe out the entire universe via their use of negative energy. At first glance, this would seem to imply that Gogeta operates comfortably at a universal level, especially since Omega Shenron can weaponize his negative energy into offensive attacks, and Gogeta effortlessly neutralizes those without breaking a sweat. However, there is a nuance here that's overlooked. Unlike conventional ki-based assaults that can obliterate space in an instant, the destruction caused by negative energy unfolds gradually, beginning with Earth, expanding to the surrounding systems, and eventually reaching cosmic realms like the Kaioshin dimension. In essence, the universe isn't under immediate threat in a traditional combat sense, but is instead being consumed by a corruptive force that spreads over time. This difference in temporal impact matters. We see it reflected in Kibito Kai's reactions across different series. During GT, Kibito remains hopeful that escape is possible, even amid universe-threatening events. In contrast, during Super, when the universe faces imminent annihilation, there's no discussion of escape. Survival is off the table. Furthermore, negative energy doesn't function like traditional battle power. It's not a measure of raw output, or AP, but akin to a corrosive virus, something that deteriorates existence gradually rather than overwhelming it instantly. Yet, even so, Gogeta towers above this threat. Attacks that condense vast stores of the very same energy demonstrate that his power isn't just superior, but immensely so. All of this supports the idea that Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta exists well above the baseline for universe busting in GT's context. While the destruction energy may unfold over time for others, Gogeta's power dwarfs it to the point that even substantial universal decay is trivial to him. If you want to quantify it in modern terms, he likely sits somewhere in the universal plus range. His superiority over Omega Shenron makes that a reasonable assumption. Now, the discussions surrounding Goku's first ascension into godhood have been explored endlessly by the fandom, but even so, it's worth giving it a concise overview. During his clash with Beerus, their blows created shockwaves powerful enough to ripple across the entire macrocosm of the Dragon Ball universe. These shockwaves weren't limited to just one realm. They extended to the Kaioshin realm, a place traditionally treated as distinct from the physical universe itself. Even if you lean towards the idea that Beerus was supplying most of the power in these exchanges, Goku's role is halting these destructive ripples, proving he was matching that scale. At a minimum, that places Goku's power output at the level required to erase the totality of the Dragon Ball macrocosm with only a few strikes. Whether one prefers to interpret that as universal or universal plus or somewhere along that dimensional spectrum, in practice is a semantic debate. What matters more is how Goku's strength stacks up within the framework of the Dragon Ball cosmology itself. When we take these feats at face value, Goku edges out Gogeta, but the margin isn't so overwhelming that Gogeta seems irrelevant. As a matter of fact, if you generously interpret GT lore, you could place Gogeta in a comparable ballpark. It's not uncommon for fans to cite universal level implications as far back as the Z era villains. Frieza, Cell, and Buu all had statements that were similar to this as well. What separates Goku's divine form, however, is how directly and explicit the presentation of that power is, with no ambiguity. There's also a particular telling comparison when you factor in Vegeta. In the early Battle of God saga, Goku remarks that even if he and Vegeta fuse into a Super Saiyan 3 Vegito, the hypothetical result would still be effortlessly defeated by Beerus. By that point, Vegito is still the most powerful fusion Goku has mentally conjured. Yet, after obtaining God Ki, Goku not only surpasses that imagined fusion, but climbs well beyond it as the battle progresses, potentially increasing his power dozens of times throughout the fight. And when the God energy later becomes integrated into his base form, it suggests Goku's overall strength rose exponentially. Contrast this with Gogeta's portrayal in GT. According to the Perfect File, Super Vegeta from the Buu arc is possibly stronger than Goku and Vegeta individually in their Super Saiyan 4 states. Since this Vegito is referenced in a retrospective context, it's clear that the statements refer to the original Buu saga fusion, not a hypothetical future version. You could say though that this is comparing the multiplier between Super Saiyan 4 to Vegito, which would make sense with the 30,000 and 40,000 increase we talked about earlier. This does imply though in GT's case that the fusion dance, at least in Gogeta's case, might not be using the full A to B times fusion formula. Instead, the boost seems far smaller, just several times stronger, rather than exponential. This would make Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta only a few dozen times more powerful than Z-era Vegito at best. So in the end, the comparison becomes a matter of scale. On one side, you have a fusion of two immensely strong fighters who are possibly individually below Z Vegito, now combined with only a modest multiplier. On the other, you have someone who has transcended even his own prior concept of the strongest fighter he could imagine, of being multiple levels above someone who could already shake the cosmos. And the difference in them both being universal is God Goku would be able to destroy the universe within an instant given the feats and scaling, whereas Gogeta could possibly do the same, but there isn't the same feats and scaling to back that up. Feat-wise and scale-wise, God Goku seems to inhabit a higher realm. That's not to say Gogeta doesn't have a strong case in his own narrative though. GT presents him as the ultimate warrior within the story's framework, but when you dissect both characters through a critical lens and compare their accomplishments directly, it becomes increasingly clear that God Goku's transformation puts him in a different category. Lastly, it's worth noting that internally, the creative goal for Super Saiyan God was to depict a warrior who transcends all the past iterations of Goku, implying surpassing every version of him, even those in alternate continuations like GT. That intent alone suggests that the narrative ceiling for God Goku was always meant to be set far higher than anything else that came before it.